Welcome everybody to our first ever vlog, I guess, or I don't know what we're gonna call it. We don't have a name yet, so uh, share your ideas with us. Um, what are some of our ideas? Quo experience.
Yeah, co-experience, quo status quo. That's too many quos. Uh, let's see.
I like real talk or something.
Yeah,
I don't know. Anyway, I'll just, we're going to be talking about marketing for small businesses. We're going to talk about how to use images on social media, how to use it on your website, how to use videos
yeah, yeah.
to generate the kind of traffic that you need to grow your business. A little bit about us. This is Sal Torres.
How's it going? I'm Sal. I've been doing video for 10 years now. Yeah, and it's been quite a journey from going to watching, movies at home to going to schooling for it, and then leaving school, and then jumping right into the workforce. And then this is Thomas Quill.
Right. I've been a photographer for about 20 years and started back in the days of film, shooting always commercial photography for catalogs and for newsprint. We did, fashion pages for Mervyn's and Macy's
Yeah,
in San Francisco, and then we got into doing furniture, a lot of transitioning from film to digital.
yeah,
So moving to a digital environment with how we change our equipment and how we change the workflow and providing value to our clients that way. And now, more recently, in the last 10 or so years, primarily focused on interior designers. And now we've included a lot of real estate agents and doing sort of branding work for them, marketing work for them. Yeah.
yeah.
So not really like shooting houses, but more like building your brand.
So you talked a little bit about transitioning from film to digital. Do you want to talk about like some of the things that you had to switch over and what that was like?
Oh yeah, yeah. So in transitioning from film to digital, uh, this happened back in 2001. That's when I joined. That's when I started working as a studio manager
Okay.
in San Francisco for a photographer. Her name is Cheryl Mader, and her clients were primarily Mervyn's, which is a clothing brand. It was kind of like Target,
Okay.
So they shot a lot of clothing on figure. So we do that maybe like once or twice a week. I'm sorry, a week out of a month, basically, or like 1 week out of every 2 months, something like that. And then we shot ads for advertising, so for HP and AT&T and T and that kind of thing. But back in the days of shooting film, everything was completely analog. So the assistants were very used to having pieces of paper and physical stickers
Yeah.
and driving to the lab, or
Uh,
you hire people with a motorcycle because they get to the lab faster.
right.
Like
Zooming through traffic.
paying so much money for messengers and whatnot.
Yeah.
And so that was like the days of film. And we would shoot, you have to bracket stuff. So we would shoot a roll, an entire roll, and then we have to shoot an entire other roll. And then we would process one roll at one exposure,
Yeah.
and we have to process a second roll if we get these snips, right? You get the first 5 things back,
Yeah.
and you're like, okay, that means I'm gonna push this whole roll one stop, or I'm gonna pull this whole roll one stop. I don't know. Does any of this make sense? Do people know
Yeah,
this
no,
stuff?
I think they do. I think,
It's very slow.
You're
And
right,
we shot
right.
Polaroids,
Mhm.
right? Because you couldn't see anything. So any adjustment you'd make, you shoot a Polaroid. And you'd have to wait for the Polaroid, which
Yeah.
is sometimes 30 seconds to whatever. You hold it in
Right.
the warmest part of your
Right.
body, and you like
Waiting.
peek at it. Is it ready yet?
And so then going digital, it was like your first experience with that.
Oh man. So even before going to digital commercially, people had digital cameras back in like mid 90s. They had what's it called? There was a Sony that you put a floppy disk in.
That's crazy stuff.
The floppy disk was 1.4 megabytes. So the images that you were shooting were like, I don't even know. But I was pretty used to file management. I had a degree in graphic design and I did a web design, so I had like a background in computers and file management and file hierarchy and that kind of stuff. A little bit of database stuff, but really just normally proficient, right, with computers. And when I joined the commercial photography world, the assistants really had no clue how to use a computer.
Wow.
It was amazing to me.
Mm-hmm.
It was really amazing to me. They couldn't update software. They didn't. They just,
Mm-hmm.
it was back in the day. The Macs were the candy Macs.
Yeah. The colors all bright. You can see through them, translucent.
Yeah. And so the transition was really easy for me because I already had digital cameras. I already knew how to manage files and all that kind of stuff. So it was kind of a stroke of luck that then I was able to be, in a way, like leapfrog the hierarchy of the photo world.
Yeah.
Because there was like the grip, and then there was like the PAs, and you had the second assistant, then you had the first assistant, and then you had the photographer, right?
Yeah.
But once I became, I guess we gave ourselves a name at that time. We called ourselves digital techs.
Okay.
And so we would show up. We had the computer, we had the tether cable, we had, we knew how to use the cameras. We knew what to do with the files. We knew what to do in Photoshop and page layout programs. So the art directors really sat next to us,
Yeah.
and then the photographer sat next to us. So it really accelerated my learning in terms of not just photography, but the entire sort of process of how is the photo going to be used in the end. And that was really the art director's role, right? The art director took their orders or direction or whatever from the client, and whatever the client is thinking, the art director has to say, okay, well, this look isn't right, this looks too, we're shooting Mervin's model, so if it's a teen model, it's like, no, that stance is too old, that stance makes you look too young, that stance is perfect, or that smile is too big, or so there's these little things that I had to learn about marketing and how, a big smile, a little smile affects the mood of the image and the emotion that you're trying to portray. So, long story short, transition to digital gave me a little leg up, and I really felt like that was a special stroke of luck, I guess.
Yeah, it's like the right time, the right place.
Right.
So when you were going to school, were you doing this at the same time, or were you doing it after you graduated?
Yeah, photography was I never thought about photography as a career. When I was going to school, I thought I would go into architecture. That was the first thought. And then the web thing caught on. This was back in 96, 97. So everyone was jumping into web, and so I learned to do HTML and JavaScript and Flash programming and that kind of stuff. And very quickly made a ton of money doing that. That was great.
Yeah. But
I then graduated and went to work for a software company in San Jose, and that was a bummer. That was a real bummer.
Yeah.
So I stuck it out for whatever time that I was there. Then 9/11 happened.
Yeah.
And so we all got laid off, and the stock market crashed, and the internet bubble blew up a second time, or the first time, or whatever. And that was when I was like, what am I going to do? And photography was what ended
Yeah.
up sticking.
That's
Yeah,
great.
because I did a lot of different things
Yeah.
at that
I
time.
was gonna say when you were learning HTML and stuff like that, I think I was only learning that for MySpace. Back when it
Yeah,
first came out, I was like,
right.
how do I get my page to look a certain way?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
so that's great. So that second or that first what is it called, that um, internet bubble burst, and then you said you got laid off, and then right after that you went into photography. Is that kind of how that went?
Yeah, I
So
did
what
a
was
whole bunch of jobs
yeah
like during that period of time, but one of the things I did was I went to San Francisco State the City College of San Francisco, I think it's
okay
called.
yeah
And they had a photography program, and they had a really so I took two classes. I took a lighting class and I took a 4x5 camera class. And the lighting teacher really inspired me. He was this old 75-year-old dude, and he was stoned all the time, and he was just tiny.
yeah
His name was Marshall Berman, and on Wednesdays he would have his lunch office hour at this Chinese restaurant. And so we'd always, all these students would just go and hang out with him at the Chinese restaurant,
yeah
and eat Chinese food and hang out with him. And yeah, it was cool. It was cool. It kind of lit a fire, just in terms of how to look at light and how fun it could be, photography could be, and what the business of it was. Because he had a studio in San Francisco, and
yeah
it like burned down like during the
jeez
earthquake or some stuff like that. Like,
a lot of
but he,
history yeah
yeah, a lot of history there. But he hooked me up with the first studio management job.
hmm
Yeah, he knew Cheryl, and that's how I
okay
got that job. Yeah.
that's great. So it's funny because we were talking about lighting, kind of like that teacher inspiring you. How important was lighting back then compared to how it is now? Is it still the same? Is it different? Um, you know, with the new digital technology that's out. Do
Yeah,
you want to talk about that? Or?
totally. Lighting is a hindsight for most marketing photography.
Yeah.
Um, for for most of what we did um, before digital, everything took so long. You had so much time to work on lighting.
Yeah.
Like it really was kind of a luxury.
Mm-hmm.
You'd spend a day or two lighting a set, and then
Yeah.
you make the set, build it, paint it. We had a studio. Because even when you took test shots, you had to run it to the lab and it had to come back, or you were doing Polaroids and had to wait. So there was always time. And so on film, there's also no leeway.
Mm.
So you had to get your meter out. We all knew like really, really well, like these old packs, right?
Yeah.
It's not even like one stop, two stop, three stops, right?
Right.
It's like the Speedotron packs. Have you seen those?
No.
The Speedotron
Yeah,
packs, they
this.
have like, so they have like 4 ports, right? One of them is all the power, so it says 2,400 watts. The other 2 ports are two half power ports, so they say 1,200 watts each. And the last port is like, a quarter power, so it's like 600 watts.
So
Right?
I'm gonna pull some images.
So if you wanted to make a certain wattage,
yeah.
certain stoppage, you had to calculate what fraction you had plugged into.
Okay. Okay. So yeah,
And it
none of
would
these
bleed
pictures
lights.
show what that is, but that's wild.
Oh, there's a cool red bird outside.
Oh, nice.
So you would like bleed. So basically, like if you couldn't get it low enough,
Yeah.
you'd plug in 2 lights and you bleed one, meaning you fire it offset into like a black hole.
Yeah.
So you could disperse the energy. It was
Yeah.
yeah, and those packs had a tendency to arc.
Mm-hmm.
So lots of assistants have flown across the room. Yeah.
Just I can't even imagine. Oh man. Yeah. So I haven't made today.
So lighting was primarily what we did. We did a lot of lighting. And then for product shoots, we did a ton of lighting for Pottery Barn, and so we did a lot of work for. I did a lot of work for Pottery Barn for about 7 years, and then for restoration hardware, for it was split, but about going 5 years, something like that. So for those two companies, we lit everything.
Yeah.
So if you look at those Pottery and Barn catalogs, they look so from the 80s, 90s,
Yeah.
from the 90s, 2000s. They have this feeling to them,
Mhm.
And we look at it now, maybe we cringe a little bit because it's such a look,
Yeah.
And we created that look. I worked for the photographer, so the guy that I worked for at Pottery Barn, I learned from. He started that look. His name is Michael Venera,
Mhm.
and he had just bought a studio in San Francisco with like every last dime he had,
Wow.
and he got a call, and it was this little company out of Sonoma, and they had a truckload of furniture, and they were
Yeah.
like, "Hey, do you have a place we can drop all this furniture off?" He's like, "Oh yeah, I have a warehouse." So he got that first gig, and from there on, the VP of marketing and him were like best buds, and so they shot. He shot for them for going on 30 years, and so I worked with him for 7 years. I was his main assistant.
Yeah.
And so we lit everything. So the sunlight that you'd see, we'd have HMIs outside, and then all the interior were reflected light, and we would have all these balances.
Yeah.
Scrim all the windows. We take all the furniture out of the house.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was a lot of work. Now, so fast forward like
Right.
15 years. I still shoot interiors predominantly for interior designers. So these are portfolio pieces, and we really take our time to shoot them. But back in the day of catalog, we would shoot probably like 3 or 4 shots a day. That's like max,
Yeah.
And for an interior designer now, we're shooting upwards of like 100 shots a day and delivering something like 50 to 80 shots of like finished, retouched shots. That's a lot.
Yeah.
And we're primarily depending on natural light.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to do with my understanding of what is happening with light and what's happening in a room with light, and how I can add something very small to create a big impact in some way. So my gear is very, very light. I travel with 2 lanterns basically, and we have big boards that we use to scrim things. But it's still important to me. Light is still very, very important to me. But we just don't have the time.
Right.
And the clients sometimes they just don't know the difference.
Yeah.
And so we do our best. We do our best to deliver the best quality we can. And for the ones who really know, they really celebrate it. And for the ones who don't know, they get a nice surprise because it an effective picture. I think a better looking picture is a more effective picture.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I think you said something important where you're like, sometimes the clients don't understand that, and obviously because it's not like their realm, but also I feel like the experience that we just talked about that you have, and how it takes you all that time to learn it and to be able to do that good of a job in that little time. I think that's super important. But also, when we're talking about gear, another thing that I wanted to bring up was knowing light and using, like, for example, what the gear that you use now. Could you still get the same results if you were using something that was not as expensive?
Oh, yeah. Gear has changed so much. It's gotten so much more portable and so much more. I think there's a lot of stuff coming out of China that's so reliable for the price. And for me, growing up working with, we all the photographers I worked for used Profoto, and Profoto. The pack's like $6,000. A head is like $2,000. Extension cable is like $500. So like it's everything is just an arm and a leg.
Yeah.
A reflector is like $150. So I grew up using those lights, and when I started my own photo business, I decided that I didn't I didn't need that
Yeah.
because I didn't want the overhead,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
I don't want the overhead. I didn't want to worry about theft. I didn't want to worry about damage.
Hmm.
Paul Buff just at that time came out with had been out for a while. I don't know. I don't remember the Paul Buff lights. They're like alien bees.
Yeah.
Alien bees.
Hmm.
They're like little square lights,
Yeah.
and they were super cheap. They were a couple $100s. They're all under $1,000
Yeah.
each,
Yeah.
right? And so it's like you could buy two or three for the price of an incomplete, like for
Yeah.
one strobe head
Right.
without the
Without the.
pack, you could buy three complete sets of lights, right?
Right. Yeah.
It made no sense to me, and so I could use them and break them, and it didn't matter. And it came down to ego. I think. I
Hmm.
think a lot of people were stuck. It's hard to understand really, but I didn't care. To me, the end result was what mattered,
Yeah.
and how I got there. Nobody needed to know, and I was such a good. I was very good at explaining things to clients, so they understood that I understood light,
Yeah.
and it didn't matter what equipment I was using. I just knew how to use it, what I was looking for, and if I didn't know how to use it, I still know how to know what I'm looking for, and I'll just keep working at it till I get what I'm looking for. So um, I've gotten to the point where I use very very little lighting equipment, but the way I use it is very strategic and in conjunction with natural light, with multiple exposures, with turning things on and off, with closing shades to get certain, and so combining that with having an excellent retouching um, to be able to put all that together seamlessly, we are much much quicker.
Yeah.
We are much much quicker in just knowing what we can do in camera, what we can do in post, and how we can marry the two. So yeah. Anyway, it's been a fun transition.
Yeah. That's great. So yeah, gear. It's important, but I mean, you can get the same results with the knowledge. So that's awesome.